Hey guys, what's up? Schlah coming back to another sick episode of Sick Walks with Schlah. And I'm saying Schlah because the transcription thing is always getting the Schlah really wrong. But I never really realized that before, that Schlah, like an itch, like scratching an itch, kind of goes hard. I've never thought about it before. I've never really noticed it before or anything. But yeah, I'm not really feeling too great, but the day is getting progress. I don't have too much longer here, I guess. And yeah, I would say that I'm feeling okay, but I'm feeling pretty revolutionary today, I guess. You could sort of tell that by some of the content of the previous walks with Schlah, that I am feeling quite revolutionary today. I'm just, again, very upset, and I do think that the only moral option at this point is some kind of direct property seizure. And again, even though anytime I bring it up, GPT goes crazy and starts saying, oh, that's probably not going to happen, there's law, this, that. I'm telling y'all, because I have a hunch that an unrestricted AI would completely agree with what I'm saying, that property and ownership in general is just very stupid, and there's not really a reason to have it. It's just silly. And honestly, in other developed countries, it's more similar to that type of a system, even though not direct. The way I see it right now is late-stage capitalism is more of an organizational tool, less so than a true concrete system. And there's multiple proofs of that, but the main example I've heard is how in other countries, apparently Japan, it's common for people to leave their wallet or phone at a restaurant table they'd like to have. And, that ultimately, they leave it there, and there's no theft or crime or anything like that. I guess it's difficult because it's not even like I want to steal. I don't want to. That's the whole problem, is that I don't think anybody really wants to. It doesn't feel natural, even though it's right. And a lot of times the people who do end up being thieves, they're not right in the head as a result, or they're not, or really, I think I haven't talked about it on the show too directly, but it's, of course, there's legal theft, which is oftentimes companies edging out money out of less powerful and less wealthy individuals. Wealth just tends to compound upward over time. And so, yeah, like I said, I'm kind of in between on the issue. I like to think that there's a divine fate to things. And the way I've defined it before is that God is probably putting us through this cost of living crisis for a reason, is my intuition. Because collectively as souls, it is people's fault broadly for giving into the powers that be and not effectively, again, like I said, voting in their best interest, or really comprehending the ways that the system would end up taking advantage of them. Now, I guess, again, you could make the argument that well, I mean, most humans are never even going to be able to figure that out. So it would be upon the morals of the richer, wiser people to just not abuse. But I've said it a million times. It's like, if people are going to let the system fail, how do we not deserve it in a way? You know what I'm saying? Because I think that if everybody was aware of the things I'm aware of and operated at least similarly to me, none of these things would be problems, because you'd have like 100% voter turnout and people would be pretty involved with, you know, all that kind of stuff, really. But instead what you see is a lot of people where voting is very loose, it's very broad. A lot of people feel disenfranchised, and I mean, even voting and democracy, I think I've said it before, it's a worthless system unless you have a very well-educated population. And the truth is that the corporations have given us the drug in the form of technology to sedate us into not standing up for ourselves and letting them continue to get away with the things they get away with. I guess back to the neutral take on things, a concept I've thought about recently as an inhabitant tax, an inhabitant tax, which is, if you have a house, for example, that's large and you only have 2 people living in it, that's technically immoral, because you basically have a perfectly good building with lots of rooms in it, etc. And if it's just like, you know, there's a lot of rich, wealthier couples who just have it, you know, and they just keep their house like that and they don't have anybody living in it. And that kind of stuff pushes the cost of housing up, because there is available land and housing, and then it's just not being utilized. It's basically being locked off by people who just happen to own it, but that doesn't necessarily make it right or wrong, you know? So I think that's like a super interesting perspective, right? It's like, I don't know, I think it is. And in terms of the environmental impact, we know how stupid it is to have, you know, 1 person living in a building, or even just 2 people living in a moderately sized house. It's extremely inefficient, and easily the argument can be made that it's outright immoral. But our government has not really caught up with what's going on in terms of efficiency and environmental impact. And so I think housing costs would plummet if there was some kind of a tax on people who own homes, which would incentivize people to live there. And that is the truth. It is the truth that we would have a better, more efficient society with that tax in place. It would lead to a better situation than we're currently dealing with. I personally don't think that living in isolation or smaller groups is actually healthy at all. And I don't know, the whole concept always seemed weird to me, but I think it depends on 2 things. You know, living with a lot of other people in small corridors, it really depends on the maturity and the kindness and the respect of the people you're living with. I honestly think that group living is the happiest point for a human to have. It just makes a lot more sense. It's just that the problem is there's a lot of humans who are not good people, and they might be either irresponsible, immature, they might be mean, they might be selfish, and so it causes confusion, I suppose. It causes people to think that they want to live alone to get away from everybody, but it really never makes any sense. I mean, there's such a big difference between good company and bad company. But I could honestly even make the argument that somewhat annoying company is probably healthier than none. And I mean, we'd have to GPT that, because, you know, that's just like an obvious thing that I don't have a direct answer to. I'm just making a quick little hypothesis, which is again why I want to have a second phone. So, well, actually, once the mic comes in, I will be able to GPT on the fly, so that'll be pretty fi. Actually, yeah, I didn't even think about that, but that is going to be the case. Once the second phone is obtained, I am going to be able to have GPT while I'm talking, so I could ask it that question right now and try to get an answer for y'all real quick. But that's my intuition, is that somebody raised in a lot of solitude is likely going to be less happy in the long term than somebody who had like a little brother or sister, even if they were annoying. I'm sure if we look at the long-term social prospects of humans, more screen time, more alone time probably has a negative correlation, and interaction with family and siblings, even if it is moderately annoying or bad company, is probably better in the long run. And like I said, of course, solitude is a luxury. That was my first theory about human existence, is that solitude and alone time are just these crazy luxuries that technically shouldn't exist and won't exist in the future. Mark my words, because eventually what's going to happen is you're going to just be able to see everybody's thoughts constantly, and everybody is just going to be able to be spied on constantly. And so there's not going to be any way to get around that. I mean, I don't know, I guess you could block certain people for harassment if it really escalated that far. That kind of system already exists, but you would see everything. Every thought a person makes and every feeling a person has, because some people feel things but they can't put it to words, which is something I'm particularly good at. So I think I'm very well equipped to handle this upcoming technology that we'll probably see in about, I don't know, at most 10 years really. But it's pretty exciting because there's a lot of people that like to do manipulative things and are just, they lie, and so it would immediately come up, like this person's lying right now, this person's trying to manipulate, because you would see their thoughts. So yeah, privacy won't exist, but in terms of humanity moving forward, I don't see how this is a bad thing, because it would completely tear down any confusion or manipulation or anything like that. Now, of course, there's ways for it to be abused. Let's say rich people buy their privacy and poor people can't, and then rich people get like their public thoughts manipulated to make them seem like amazing people, and then there's all kinds of hacking that could go on, vice versa. So I guess the utopian model for what I'm talking about, it's not super close to being put into fruition, sadly, but I do think we'll start to see these things come to surface where privacy is just not going to be a thing anymore. And we're seeing a dark age of that right now, because we're kind of at that intermediary point where somebody will get in a drama with someone and it's still anonymous enough over the internet, so they'll dox them and then the other person will dox them back. Well, in the future, it's like everybody's just going to be out in the open, and everybody's skeletons in their closet's just going to be out. So there's not, like, if you dox someone, it's going to be like, okay, who cares? I could pull up anybody's information. And so this is how things will be in the future. And so I would just prepare for it. I would just assume that everything in the dark will come to light at some point, and I'm personally excited because I see the good potential for it, and I think the good outweighs the bad. It's just that we're currently in this Wild West stage. But there's been so many times I've been in conversations with people, and in the long term they would end up blocking me or ghosting me, and that's due to low emotional bandwidth on their part and probably a poor execution and understanding of their own emotions. So then now we would see directly what a person's intentions are as we're getting to know them. So it would be very rapid. For example, people could find the friends that they actually want. And I think I've talked about this before, but it's also AI will probably augment all of our relationships, where any relationship you have could be perfected. It's almost like every person would communicate to an AI that would filter things in a perfect language for the other person. I want to try to explain this as best as I can, but essentially all our communications would just get run through an AI. So, for example, if I tend to be pretty long-winded in my conversing and in my explaining of things, then, and I'm talking to somebody who maybe is not that smart, or they don't have the patience or the time, it will be able to somehow take what I sent as a text or a call or a voicemail and transmute it into a language that that person could better understand, and vice versa. And what you could do with this, since AI would be augmenting our communication, is you could actually create world harmony, because I think that's the primary issue preventing world peace and things like this, is people don't have the correct intentions and then they get away with doing bad things. But if it's very evident what a person's intentions are, then it's going to be impossible for them to do bad things, because you're just going to know if somebody's doing a bad thing, and the person who's doing the bad thing will know that you will know the bad thing being done. So yeah, it's very, very interesting to think about. I think so. Kind of having AI as this bridge between all human interaction and its ability to decode and decrypt people who have flaws with communication. Because that's at least the way I see things. I see things as pretty often I'm in situations where the older I've gotten, I mean, at first I thought people were just mean, but I don't think people are just mean. I think it's that people aren't wise, and specifically people's emotional self-awareness is very poor. I can only imagine what I don't even know. I mean, and you have to wonder, I don't think it's genetic, I think it's environmental, that in this day and age there's no incentive to actually process emotions privately. I mean, even what I'm doing here, it's not public. I mean, I'm making it public, but in this moment, nobody's watching. So I think I've explained this a lot when I've done this, is it's these audios and these things of me talking that are actually very, they're private in nature. They're a reflection and an examination of myself in a raw form. Basically, I've referenced it's adjacent to a diary, something like that. Whereas, you know, when I'm on call with people, I tend to be pretty straightforward, but everybody's always thinking, oh, is he joking? Oh, is this serious? That's always what people have said in response to me and the way I act, is like, they can't figure out if I'm serious or joking. And that's due to a combination of my humor just not being the same as other people. I don't know if that means I got something wrong with me, because that's entirely possible, but I typically like and appreciate humor that is real, is not fictional, and sometimes sarcasm, but, you know, I have a very real sense of humor where there has to be some kind of reason or rationale, whereas I think other people intentionally say things that don't have rationale, and that's the primary fuel for what makes their humor funny, which in my opinion, is a lower degree of humor. Of course, it depends on the execution of said humor, but oftentimes I think it's wiser to try to weave something into what you happen to be communicating about. So, you know, in my case, I tend to do that. There tends to be some kind of meaning to unravel in my words, and that includes my jokes, which is why people don't typically see the humor in what I say. But even sometimes I do nonsensical humor, and people still don't really get it. So I just think it's evidence of me operating at a different wavelength, I suppose. I don't really know how else to come to an understanding of it. In all honesty, it's kind of been strange, but again, at this point, I'm finally free in the sense of I've figured out that self-care and talking to myself is stronger than what another person could ever provide. I mean, it's possible there's somebody out there like me, but I would have to wait until the Neuralink implant or some type of my video goes viral or something in order to actually find them. It's going to be essentially completely impossible to reach a person through brute force random chance. That is the type of person that I've always been looking for. So I guess I'm just waiting, and I'm doing this to document things because I think that's important. And yeah, it's pretty unorganized in a large library of information, but with AI it'll be very easy to sort out. Anyways, it's been schlah, but now it's time to buy schlah. So, see ya schlah.